Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the first of potentially many Opportunity and Promise Zone webinars hosted by the Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development here in California. We'd like to thank all the people who are participating and all the people attending. We're really happy to have a very large suite of partners, including HUD and the Promise Zone representatives, as well as some state organizations. We're going to go over what the Promise Zones are, what Opportunity Zones are, how we're using them, and what we're providing for the state. So now I'm going to turn it over to Trey Bradley, who is a Senior Business and Economic Development Specialist here at GO-Biz, and he'll be able to run you through what the next steps are, including our first presenter, Eric Yost from the Housing and Urban Development.
Great, thank you everybody for joining the webinar. So just a quick go around on kind of the lay of the land for the next 2 hours. So if you have a question, you can ask a question directly in the chat box via Zoom, and you'll be paired with GO-Biz staff here to answer your question. If we cannot answer your question immediately off the bat, we will then store it to then follow up with you at a later point. And if it is a question about one of the programs or to one of the specific presenters today here in the webinar, we will then direct you to the appropriate email contact for the question that you may have. The second piece is that this webinar is being recorded and will be posted on our Business GO-Biz website. So if you have any questions about finding the recording or where to access the recording, those will be provided into a follow-up email to all the registrants within the webinar and through our vertical response system, which many of you have been receiving for registration for today's event. So without further ado, to maximize the time here, I'm going to go ahead and introduce Eric Yost from Housing and Urban Development.
Hi, everyone. Thank you very much, Trey, for allowing me the chance to talk about how HUD is engaged with Opportunity Zones and Promise Zones. So if you can go to the next slide, I first wanted to chat a little bit about our Promise Zone initiative. So nationally, in the Promise Zones, there are 22 Promise Zones across the country. In round one, there were 5 awarded, round 2, 8, and round 3, 9. That includes 14 urban Promise Zones, and then 9 are rural and tribal communities. And they're a 10-year designation from when the designation agreements were signed. And they cover areas that have high poverty rates, in addition to a cap of population of 200,000 in contiguous areas. On the next slide is a map that shows where the Promise Zones are located in the United States. And as you can see, we actually have 3 Promise Zones in the state of California. 4 Promise Zones in the state of California: Sacramento, Los Angeles, the South Los Angeles Transit Empowerment Zone, and San Diego. On the next slide, you'll see, in addition to HUD offering Promise Zones as a designation, we also designated several places as Promise Zone finalists. And there are 7 Promise Zone finalists in the state of California that you can see on the map here as well, including Hayward, Oakland, and Stockton up in Northern California, and then communities down in Southern California. On the next slide, you'll see the overview of what Promise Zones were, why Promise Zones were created. And there are around 5 key policy domains: to create jobs, increase economic opportunity, improve educational opportunities, to reduce serious or violent crime, and to leverage private capital. And then on the next slide, you'll see the key aspect of why these communities were selected is they were high need with high capacity. And bringing along federal support to these different designated places would then increase opportunity for residents and accelerate community revitalization. On the next slide, you'll see the 4 key benefits that were offered to Promise Zones. They would be getting 5 AmeriCorps Vistas from the Corporation for National and Community Service annually, a federal liaison assigned to assist with navigating federal programs, and then certain preferences for competitive federal programs and technical assistance. And then the last one was tax incentives if enacted by Congress. And that will make sense to why we're turning it over to now discussing about Opportunity Zones, which was where some of the legislation initially included the Promise Zone initiative. And you'll hear from the 4 California Promise Zones later. So I think this is a really exciting time for really this rapid influx of entrepreneurial capital to help build community wealth into communities, and how the federal government's entrepreneurial spirit is matching the private market with our public investments for resource alignment. So on the next slide, I want to just share something that you may have been hearing in the press lately. You may have been hearing that there's an argument for repealing the tax incentives for opportunity zone, that it's not helping poor communities, that it's only been marginally successful, and that it's actually transferring wealth to large property owners or to the wealthy. And if you click on the next slide, I just wanted to share with you that these are actually things that I pulled from the newspaper in the last 2 weeks about the low-income housing tax credit program. So what I wanted to really share with you is while you're hearing a lot of negative press about opportunity zones, there are a tremendous amount of positive benefits that are now occurring across the country with opportunity zones, as you will hear. But you can hear some of the same news that you heard about with the LIHTC program 25 years ago and today. So let's talk about the concerns up front, and then I want to address them. On the next slide, there are clear differences between urban areas, rural areas, and suburban. 95% of the opportunity zone census tracts that were selected across the country are neighborhoods that have not seen investment for decades. And that includes many rural places and many suburban areas. And also there's been a big change in how the community economic development field has been reacting to the Opportunity Zone initiative. And it's clear that there needs to be a new paradigm that needs to move forward on how that works. Hopefully we'll be receiving the draft regulations will be final shortly, and you'll be hearing a lot about the impact-driven investments happening across the country. So on the next slide, you'll see kind of this big change that's been happening in the marketplace as a result of opportunity zones. Really, the existing community development field is being replaced by community wealth building. So much of what we've known the last 10, 20 years on community development has really proven to not help as many communities as we thought. And so there's a new way to address these high poverty communities to help build wealth within these communities rather than just building in these communities. And so Opportunity Zones has really shifted the focus around community wealth building. On the next slide, you'll see some challenges, additional challenges and misconceptions about Opportunity Zones that I'll address. So first of all, let's go to the next slide. And you'll see kind of here are the California Opportunity Zones. And the state of California did a really good job of matching up the appropriate census tracts to be selected, as you can see on here, on some key indicators from everything from poverty rates to adults not working to including bachelor degrees attained in rent burden. And so you can see these are definitely census tracts selected. Were selected with clear indications of high need for these communities. On the next slide, you'll see even more details about how these census tracts, 879 Opportunity Zone census tracts were selected across the state of California, from everything from those who were eligible versus those that were designated, and then across all the state. And you can dive into that deeper. But on the next slide, what I want to do is make sure that after this presentation, you'll have these slides that you can walk away with 4 key things. One is understanding how the federal government is aligning resources versus the state and local to these designated Opportunity Zone census tracts. To understand there's a difference between public Opportunity Zone investment versus the private market investment. And then understand, obviously, there's a difference between the real estate investments versus operating business investments. And then really to focus more on community wealth building versus replacing the existing community economic development. So on the next slide, you'll see how could you support a nurturing minority and women storytellers as well as innovators and creators by driving inclusion and culture across every diversity and facet of this ecosystem of a business. So on the next slide, there's actually a fund that has been developed that is working in communities such as here in Los Angeles, where I'm located, to actually address this, this need for building this economic ecosystem in entertainment industry. And then on the next slide, how can Opportunity Zones help artificial intelligence startups thrive in the low-income communities? So the following slide will show there's actually a qualified opportunity fund that is being developed and is already investing money that's based here in Los Angeles as well, that's helping these type of businesses. So really the next slide will tell you, is your city, neighborhood, or community ready for this entrepreneurial capital absorption into your capital stock to help build community wealth? So this all started on the next slide, you'll see, with Investing in Opportunity Act that was co-sponsored by both representatives from both parties. And this legislation began as a result of much of what was needed for promise zones. And so promise zones were included in the original legislation, but this Investing in Opportunity Act ended up in the tax bill that we know of today. On the next slide, you'll see the purpose of Opportunity Zones. So it's focused on investment, job growth, and tax relief. And then on the next slide, I wanted to show how this flows down to the work we do at HUD. So as I mentioned, it came out in the Jobs and Tax Act of 2017. The White House then created an executive order to create the White House Opportunity and Revitalization Council. And then if you click next, you'll see that now it flows over to HUD's strategic plan and HUD goals because we are part of the White House Opportunity and Revitalization Council, and we have program office support in the field and on the ground in various field offices and regional offices to provide technical assistance for opportunity zones. So the next slide, you'll see how this is addressed in our strategic plan and at HUD in our 5-year strategic plan. And then on the following slide, you'll see some information about the executive order that created the White House Opportunity and Revitalization Council. So there are 2 key things that are being worked on or have been done, which is a detailed work plan, and then recommendations to encourage public and private investment in opportunity zones. And then 2 other reports will be coming out shortly. So what does this White House Opportunity and Revitalization Council do? On the next slide, you'll see 3 key things. So it's focused on guidance, coordination, and measurement. And really what I want to focus here is on the coordination of other federal agencies in administering programs. So on the next slide, you'll see there are 5 key work streams we're working on, which is economic development, entrepreneurship, safe neighborhoods, education workforce development, and then measurement and analysis. And so when you go to the next slide, you'll see how HUD is engaged with these efforts. So we're coordinating federal programs and investments from across all the federal government agencies that are aligned to the council. We're trying to lead local efforts to attract private investment, and then we're collecting data to assess the effectiveness of investments. So on the next slide, you'll see 2 key terms that I may reference, the qualified opportunity zone being the designated place, so the census tract selected, and then a qualified opportunity fund, so the fund that actually may be investing. On the next slide, you'll see kind of the benefits and the timeline many of you have heard about investing in opportunity zones. So the key of the 5 years for the 10% step up in basis, the 7 years for the additional 5% step up in basis, and then the 10-year hold period if your money in the fund is invested in the community, which would allow for a permanent exclusion of any capital gains you earned during 10 years, plus the full 15% step up in basis. So when you turn to the next slide, you'll see really these low-income census tracts were nominated by governors, and they're focused on private investment and public investment. So let's take a look of what that looks like. On the next slide, you'll see that these distressed communities that were selected are focused on bringing together federal support, local government support, state government support. If you click next, you'll see in addition to getting philanthropic support, and then finally, if you click next, you'll see getting community partners and stakeholders to the table to make sure these investments are community-centric and community-focused. If you click on the next slide, you'll start to see a series of different legislative agendas that have gone through Congress or are currently going through Congress that have additional benefits or more clarification to the Opportunity Zone Tax Incentive Program. So you'll see everything from disaster recoveries and addressing designated places for disaster recovery. On the next slide, you'll see additional work around lead remediation and emerging markets and credit gap. And then even on the next slide, you'll have the opportunity to see even more bills that have come forth. And the last 2 or 3 are just recently came before Congress in the Senate and the House on November 6th, which is the Opportunity Zone Reporting and Reform Act, and then Fairness and Diversity and Opportunity Zone Investments that was introduced on 11/8. And then there's a final one that I have there on the Accountability and Transparency Act that has not been introduced into Congress yet, but a draft of the bill has been released. On the next slide, you'll see some more details about what we're doing at the federal government. So these are the key federal agencies that are aligned to each of the work streams to try and address the resources and find programs and grants that might help for these designated census tracts. So this is about public investment. So on the next slide, you'll see what our action items are for each of these work streams, followed by the next slide, which is the details of each of these work streams. So on the next slide, you'll see the strategies and goals that are all aligned for each of these work streams that we have at the federal government. So for example, economic development. So we're trying to target and streamline investment programs in the federal government to opportunity zones to help these communities, or trying to how to leverage federal grants and loans in a more integrated way. or even just to improve and increase coordination between federal, state, and local and tribal capital investment. And then across the other work streams, you can see there's a variety of aspects we're doing to help opportunity zones. On the following slide, you'll see what we're doing on measurement and analysis. So you've heard much that there's not much being measured, or how are we going to track this? There's actually a report that the Council of Economic Advisors is preparing that will address the measurement and analysis to how to help for the efforts we're doing in opportunity zones, both from our federal public investment to private investment. On the following slide, you'll see the official Opportunity Now or opportunityzones.hud.gov website, where we have various resources for investors, for local leaders, entrepreneurs, resources, and news. So on the next slide, you'll see an example from our website of two key documents that I want to talk about. One is the completed action items report, and the other is the community toolkit. On the next slide, you'll see that when you go to the website, you'll be able to pull up our Opportunity Zones Toolkit Volume 1 that has a roadmap to readiness on how you can be prepared to invest in opportunity zones, both from a public investment, from government helping, but also from the private investment market and opportunity zones. So we provide those 4 stages for readiness of understanding, aligning, establishing, and partnering. And then on the next slide, you'll see some key questions and a summary from the document of how to prepare for potential investments. Everything around housing needs to economic drivers to looking at your existing plans, creating an ecosystem, and then increasing your capacity to work on opportunity zones. On the next slide, you'll see that when the website was announced, we also released our completed program targeting actions report. So on the next slide, what does that mean? So we have taken 16 federal agencies, and we've aligned to date over 171 grants or programs to opportunity zones. And that includes grants that have preference points or priority consideration for communities that were designated as an opportunity zone. Or we may have aligned programs, and those are non-grants, but programs where we're now giving benefits to opportunity zones. So you can see the various federal agencies and how many have been awarded those extra benefits for opportunity zones. But let me give you an example with HUD. So on the next slide, you'll see these are all HUD grants that have already been released or are currently open that give preference points if you're doing work in an opportunity zone. So that's doing work in a designated opportunity zone. You can see it's most of HUD's grants and programs that are discretionary that we award. And then on the next slide, you'll see an example of programs that HUD has aligned with opportunity zone preference. So what that might look like is we give incentives if you're doing FHA insured mortgage transactions in opportunity zones, either through our multifamily program or our nursing home or residential care program, which could include reduced transaction fees. It could include a designated underwriter, and it could include additional benefits. And again, these are all different programs that we align or technical assistance that we can give. On the next slide, you'll see we also have done several webinars. So this is an example of one we did on how to use multifamily transactions and how to use opportunity zone funds in a multifamily transaction. So you can go to the website and watch that webinar. So on the next slide, you'll see that while the federal government has created the rules for the opportunity zone fund investment, really this opportunity zone tax incentive is taking place via kind of more local market norms and policy and practices that are happening in states and local government. We've aligned our federal resources, but now states and local government are doing the same. On the next slide, you'll see some examples of some tremendous work that partners such as Accelerator for America and NOAC Metro Finance Lab have created to share information about what's happening in the opportunity zone landscape. On the next slide, you'll see really now the conversation is maturing on both sides of the aisle. So really we're learning the language of communities while entrepreneurs are learning the language of communities and vice versa, that communities are now learning the language of entrepreneurs on how to handle these investments. On the next slide, you'll see that there have been over 400 funds that have been announced with over $70 billion potential for these growing funds. On the next slide, you'll see, so this includes over 120 funds that have over $33 billion that just want to invest in housing alone, compared to the LIHTC program that's only $8 billion annually. So what does that mean? On the next slide, you'll see really the investor base has been very broad. There's a lot of local capital investing first, and we're trying to chart the vision of what's happening in communities. On the next slide, you'll see that Novogradac has done some surveys on opportunity zones, and while much of the investment is focused on real estate transactions, really there's a big shift happening as in the current marketplace to operating businesses. So for example, on the next slide, you'll see some of the early transactions happening across the country. The very first was a sawmill conversion in Vicksburg, Mississippi that actually saved 350 jobs by converting it, or ensuring that the sawmill stayed open. And then on the next slide, just in the housing spectrum alone, I wanted to share these transactions. So everywhere from Charlotte, Virginia to Newark, New Jersey to Chicago, Illinois to 2 projects here in Los Angeles, these are all places that are using Opportunity Zone funds to invest in affordable housing developments throughout the country, including preserving and retrofitting over 3,300 low-income units just in Chicago alone with one fund. So on the next slide, you'll also see there's several socially motivated funds that are forming as well. So much of what you've been hearing about the large-scale funds, there's also a lot of local, smaller, socially motivated funds. And what does that look like? On the next slide, you'll see an example of innovation that's happening in states across the country. So state and local government are passing certain legislation to create innovations as we are in the federal government. And then on the next slide, you'll see what's happening with the emerging ecosystem. So the ecosystem in opportunity zones is rapidly developing, and innovations from everywhere from Alabama to Erie, Pennsylvania, that are focused on creating capital solutions and policies in unique places to help with what's happening with opportunity zones. So when you go to the next slide, you'll see an example of some overarching principles from much of the literature that's out there is really focused on the systems thinking and ensuring that equity is part of the decision-making process, and linking investments to human capital, linking it to the people in these communities, in these opportunity census tracts, so that they can be community-centric investments, both from the public investment side and the private investment side. So what do you need to do? So on the next slide, you'll see that really the focus is immediate action. So get started, be open for investors, designate someone that's a lead, keep your local score, and ensure to engage the community. And you'll see the theme consistent across much of the research. On the next slide, you'll see Locus also has recommendations for major stakeholders from everything from the federal government to the state to philanthropy and investors. And then on the following slide, you'll see that California is still one of 4 states that is non-conforming, but we're looking forward to hearing more about that in the future. Thank you very much for your time.
Great, thank you very much, Eric. So just to go on a little bit to the next piece, we're gonna just talk briefly about what we do here at GO-Biz and then opportunity zones in California. So as Eric had pointed out, there are 879 qualified census tracts within the state of California, 57 out of 58 counties in the state. And you can see there's quite a bit of a variety of types of opportunity zones. There are some that are very large, some that are very small. There is a high propensity of rural opportunity zone census tracts. There's tribal census tracts as well throughout California. And with 879, we have over 10% of all qualified opportunity zone census tracts within the nation. There's also a strong alignment with disadvantaged communities metrics that the state has, and also strong alignment with CalEnviroscreen, which is a metric and tool that you can search online that coincides with census tracts that are the most burdened by pollution and environmental effects. And the last point is that we'd like to make a point to many folks who reach out about the Opportunity Zone program and kind of the differences between census tract to census tract, is that each census tract within the state of California has a different range of needs, assets, and community desires. No one specific qualified Opportunity Zone census tract is the same as another. So we do manage through GO-Biz, the opzones.ca.gov website, and you can see it here, the splash page. We have resources on the website for investors, communities, and businesses, an investor toolkit that then allows you to connect to an OZ marketplace. And then of course we have a list of state agencies with supportive programs. Many of that have programs that align with goals of both the Opportunity Zone and Promise Zone program. We have the state integrated opportunity zone map, and you can go ahead and just search this. It's right on the front page when you go to opzones.ca.gov. It does have a address search function in the upper right-hand corner. And the most frequent question we get at GO-Biz or where are my opportunity zones within my community. And with this tool, you can also, as you can see in this next slide, you can layer on different types of investments. You can layer on your assembly district, your Senate district. You can see where California cities, the boundaries lies. You can also see the new market tax credit program. You can see the California Climate Investments Program. And then here we can see in the map, we have selected both the California Climate Investment Programs, which you can see a lot of those throughout the state. And we also have a notice of high-speed rail on here as well. The next piece is the Ask the Wizard tool. So you can go on the OpZone's website, and you can also go to the Ask the Wizard page. You can be then directly paired with a GO-Biz staff based on what your question is, and we'll do our best to answer or direct you to our partners that have the answers that you need. There's also, we provide through that tool, if you're interested as a business to find other programs that for business support through our California Business Investment Services team. We provide services in both tailored site selection and incentive navigation for businesses in California. So that being those businesses looking to locate within California or those in California already looking to expand. And then of course the incentive navigation piece. So those range from tax credit programs to taxes at exclusions from manufacturing. It ranges a gamut, and depending on what your business needs, we can definitely align to find the incentives that are most fitting. And you can also use the Ask the Wizard tool at the bottom to sign up for continued updates and notice of future events relating to both programs. So the last piece, just really quickly before we move on to the first promise zone that we have featured, is we're just making a point that communities in California across the state are developing portfolios and fund prospects. They're using tools like S3 and GIS. They're using different other tools to show the opportunity zones within their community. And they're also engaging their community in unique ways to find from the bottom up what are the needs of the community and what are the communities interested in using their opportunity zones for. So we're really pushing to look those folks who direct questions within our Ask the Wizard tool to search within their counties, for example, their county economic development agency or their local city government, to find what plans they have for their opportunity zones within their region, and to also find resources and tools that engage and highlight opportunity zones within their respective communities. And that is the conclusion for our small portion of the state. So I'm now going to turn it over to the Slate Z team, which is the first promise zone we will be featuring here today in the webinar.
Hi, thank you, Trey. This is Angela Huang with the HUD Los Angeles Field Office. Thanks for letting the promise zones highlight a bit of our work. So I'm the community liaison for the South LA Promise Zone, otherwise known as the South LA Transit Empowerment Zone, or Slate Z. It is a third round promise zone, having received its designation in June of 2016. And to better understand Slate Z and how our partners work together, we like to talk about our theory of change. And so education is the foundation for everything, but you have to be able to feel safe and be able to get to school. So there's an element of public safety that we have to address as well. Education leads to good paying jobs. With jobs comes economic development, and in order to access these different opportunities, you need safe and reliable transit. So when you look at all our different issue areas, education, public safety, jobs, economic activity, and transit, it makes up Slate Z's 5 work groups. The collaborative is a 10-year federal place-based initiative that follows the collective impact model. We have over 71 and growing partner organizations. In our partnership, they include public agencies, private and nonprofit corporations, educational institutions, and much more. Each of these different partners self-identify into one or more of our 5 work groups, and they leverage resource, expertise, and work together really on projects and advocacy campaigns, grant applications to achieve Slate Z's overall mission, which is to revitalize South LA by moving our residents to economic opportunity. And so just a little about just promise zones. I know we didn't go too much into them previously. There's 22 across the country. There's 14 urban promise zones and 8 rural and tribal promise zones. And as you guys all heard previously, there are 4 promise zones in the state of California. Next slide, please. So Slate Z's service area is what we think of historic South Central LA. It's very culturally and historically rich, and It's important to the community and our partners that we really work together to preserve what is existing there. And so if you look at our map, this is our service area. Of the 22 promise zones, we have the largest population at almost 198,000 residents in roughly 5 square miles, which is a lot of folks. This isn't a updated, oh no, it is an updated map. So I won't read all the stats up there, but as you can see, this is a very high need area. Our highest tracked poverty rate is at 77%. And if you look at Slate Z's map, you'll see this light blue line to kind of the north of our boundary. You see the green line to the western part of our boundaries, and then the blue line to the eastern part of the boundaries. And so the whole purpose of identifying these lines was to follow major transit lines that come into and through South LA in order to really take advantage of these revitalization opportunities, whether it's related to transit-oriented development, education and training, job opportunities, as long as it was accessible to residents via transit. So next slide, please. So in terms of what Slate Z is doing with the opportunity zones, Slate Z and its partners are really looking at opportunity zones as an opportunity to bring investments into a community that's been largely ignored and divested in. You know, we're all looking to help marry all these different parties, whether they're investors, developers, and communities and cities, so that we can all really take advantage of the incentives that come with opportunity zones. So here on the right, you'll see a map of our Slate Z boundaries and the black dotted lines, and you'll see all of the different opportunity zone census tracts in the South LA area. There's 46 total, of which 22, the green, are actually located in Slate Z's boundaries. And so how is Slate Z preparing or helping prepare our communities for opportunity zones, like Eric was stating? How do we really prepare our neighborhoods, our communities, our residents for investment? And so Slate Z has formed an Opportunity Zone subcommittee consisting of investors, CDFIs, public agencies, representatives from offices of elected officials, our community-based organizations, and so much more. And this subcommittee is really helping us drive and develop the investment prospectus and an overall strategy to work with both sides of the equation when we're thinking of what goes into an opportunity zone: your investors and developers, and then your community. And later on this year, we are planning to host several community engagement events with our community-based organizations to really help educate and inform our partner organizations. So with that next slide, I wanted to turn it over to Slate Z's Executive Director, Effie Turnbull-Sanders, to talk about one of our focus projects.
Thank you, Angela. You know, this is a really exciting opportunity today to talk about some of the work that we're doing within our Promise Zone, otherwise known as Slate Z. As Eric mentioned, we are looking at how do we layer opportunities, how do we layer resources from the federal, state, and local levels to be able to ready our community-based organizations to be able to absorb capital and the resources now that are at play. And one of the really innovative projects that is going forward in South Los Angeles is a program that looks at the South LA corridor on the Slauson Avenue area, and there's an abandoned rail spur that now is bounded by a lot of industrial uses, and Metro LA, the LA Metropolitan Transit Authority, is planning a potential pedestrian and bicycle walkway through South LA and some of the most park poor areas, some of the most inaccessible areas in terms of you know, traffic safety. We have kind of the highest high injury network of streets because of the lack of transit infrastructure in the area. And we're really looking to bring more resources to layer on top of this project that is planned for Metro, that would plan an over 5 mile corridor running through South LA and ultimately, hopefully, through the southeast cities all the way to the LA River. So the slide in front of you right now is looking at the Slauson Avenue corridor. So you can see this abandoned rail spur bounded by industrial uses and Slauson Avenue. We'll take to the next slide, looking at the partners on this project. So we applied for a State Strategic Growth Council Transformative Climate Communities grant, which uses cap and trade funds to focus resources to some of the most environmentally burdened and disadvantaged communities in the state. You'll hear more from the State Strategic Growth Council later. We won in 2018 the planning grant with the highest score in the state, partnering with the City of Los Angeles to build out a strategy along this corridor. The City of Los Angeles is currently developing a specific plan for that corridor, and in partnership with the organizations that you see mentioned on the screen, we are looking at a planning area of about 8 square miles in the City of Los Angeles. That would include resources like work source centers, youth source centers, educational institutions, private sector partners. We'll go to the next slide. You'll see the project area. And that project area will focus on work by community-based organizations on the next slide. That will focus on 3 major planning areas. Those are focused on housing and parks, land use and jobs, and air quality and transportation, along with community health. And so within this bounded area, you'll see there's an area called the Goodyear Tract, and it's in the lower right corner of the blue area on the screen, and that whole area is a designated opportunity zone area. So we're looking at how do we layer in potential resources from the State Strategic Growth Council, opportunity zone investments, potential federal grants with opportunity zone investment opportunities, and then building on our strategies for economic development along the Slauson corridor, along with workforce development opportunities. So the State Strategic Growth Council program really was kind of this vehicle to start bringing all of those elements together. And we'll go to the next slide, which is the demonstration of the South LA Climate Commons Plan. At the end, we hope to have this pedestrian and bicycle path, and we are working on a robust community engagement strategy so that residents are aware of what's happening, looking at anti-displacement efforts to strategize on how to, when these investments are made, how do residents get a chance to stick around to enjoy them? How do we prepare small businesses for potential escalation of commercial rents and technical assistance so that they are able to thrive in place? And those mom and pop stores that really make the community what it is, how do we retain those and develop more thriving businesses and models for wealth development and acquisition within South Los Angeles? And so I think the opportunity zone strategy layered with other funding and resources is something that we're looking to capitalize on and bring to the community so that this is a community-led, engaged effort for revitalizing the region. Thank you very much. And I think that we will turn this over to the next panelist.
Great, thank you very much. So now we're gonna switch it over to the Sacramento Promise Zone team. And then hold on. So Tyrone?
Very good. Well, thank you for the opportunity to share the great things that are happening in Sacramento. As we say, it's always a great day in the Sacramento Promise Zone. We were a part of the second round of cities that were awarded Promise Zone designation in April of 2015. And so our agency at the SHRA, the Sacramento Housing and Redevelopment Agency, we're a multi-jurisdictional agency. That means we serve as the housing authority and the housing staffing for both the city of Sacramento and Sacramento County. In addition to our work in the Promise Zone, we're working very closely with both jurisdictions on issues and opportunities related to opportunity zones. The city of Sacramento is the lead agency for opportunity zones in Sacramento, and Leslie Fritchie is the contact. But we've got some great things going on, and in the next slide, just like many of the others that you've heard, we have 5 focus areas, and that's on education, from early childhood education to high school completion and jobs and careers. Health, described as access to quality health care, as well as nutrition and healthy lifestyles. Jobs, as in job training and successful and sustainable job placement. Economic development that focuses on business retention, creation, and expansion in business districts that serve our neighborhoods throughout Sacramento, and then sustainably built communities. The Sacramento Housing and Redevelopment Agency is the agency that provides all of the affordable housing financing for both the city and the county. My department administers all of the federal funds that are geared to block grant dollars and community development, as well as affordable housing. So we're the one-stop shop. When you talk about comprehensive coordination, we're at the core of that here in Sacramento. As you can see in the highlighted areas, that is the area that's described as the Sacramento Promise Zone. It goes from the northern part of the city all the way down into the southern part. And many of our opportunity zone census tracts are ideally aligned with the Promise Zone. In the next slide, what do we do as the core agency for coordinating the Promise Zone activities and supporting opportunity zone activities? Our first line is communication, sharing with our partners about events and opportunities. Second is connecting and leveraging those resources both at the city, state, and federal level. Part of what we do is we support our partners in efforts at looking at getting additional funding, particularly from our federal and state partners, in providing letters of support, technical assistance, ongoing workshops that really enable them to strengthen their capacity to be effective in applying for funding and effective in monitoring and operating those projects that are funded by outside resources. And then we are always looking for best practices, looking at the best way to bring the needs of the community, connecting that to our local partners who are agencies who are already focusing on those 5 core areas. To date, since 2015, we've been able to document over $176 million of private sector or philanthropic funding into our Promise Zone neighborhoods through the work of our Promise Zone partners. And so here in Sacramento, we're very cognizant of how important it is to be able to work well with private sector and philanthropic partners to accomplish their goals of investing as well as enhancing the lives of our residents. Our next slide really highlights a number of the accomplishments. First and foremost, HUD has been a phenomenal partner. Oftentimes we hear people kind of jokingly say, we're the government and we're here to help. And people kind of, the eyes sometimes roll up in the back of their heads like, sure you are. But I can tell you that since the day that we got the call from HUD saying we're happy to join the phenomenal work that's going on in Sacramento, they have been a cheerleader and 100% supporter every step of the way. You've heard about some of the benefits that come with the Promise Zone designation, is the bonus points and the vistas. But what really has shifted everything that we're doing here in Sacramento has been the HUD Community Liaison. We currently have Dr. Michael Huff, who is probably one of the most experienced HUD liaisons because he served in Los Angeles before he joined our team here in Sacramento. But it is the HUD liaison who helps us navigate through all of the channels and opportunities at the federal level. And without the federal liaison, we could never have been as successful as we have been or as optimistic as we are. We're also a part of the National Coalition of Promise Zones. All 22 Promise Zones gather together about one time a year, but on every month there is a call. We're not in isolation and we are not in opposition of each other. We are a unified force of cross-sector collaboration executives and community leaders, and we're committed to sharing best practices. Even as we speak in Washington, D.C., members of Promise Zones from all over the nation are coming together to do two things. One, to plan, and the other is to leverage and share information with those agencies who are in D.C., who have the opportunity to join with all of us in addressing the issues. In addition to that, we're part of the California Affinity Group. Because California is the only state in the country that has 4 Promise Zones, and we have Promise Neighborhoods and other federal programs, P3 and others, that we come together and have discussions on how we can move the initiative forward. All of the things that I've shared really create the ideal foundation in which to launch opportunity zones, because we're already laid the foundation. We're already in the communities. We're already engaged in planning. We're already engaged in leveraging private resources. We're already engaged in committed to cross-sector collaborations and documenting outcomes. As you'll see on the next slide, one of the things that we've been able to do is we focused with healthcare centers and building healthcare centers and public housing. We're having health fairs to encourage people to eat healthy and exercise. We partnered with Samuel Merritt University to establish the first of its kind in the country where a college is inserting the Promise Zone as its area of internships for nurses in partnership with Kaiser Permanente. Sac State, one of our education partners, deliberately chose and sought out a location within the Sacramento Promise Zone boundary to locate their new campus. We're working with the Art Museum and bringing art and cultural expression into communities that generally have not had an opportunity to do that. On our next slide, you'll see that not only are we working on health and education, but we're committed to job training and successful job placement. Earlier this year, we announced through collaboration, the Promise Zone Collective collaboration, that has invested $750,000 to accelerate revitalization. That's led by our utility company, SMUD, and a number of other partners. But the ultimate goal is to not just talk about jobs in our challenged communities, but to ensure that people are getting access to training, that that training is relevant, that that training is successful, and that those individuals who are either unemployed or underemployed are supported to be successful in the workplace. That supports the work of our small business, economic development, and inclusive development opportunities. Because when we've got a trained and informed and employed workforce, that supports small businesses locating, expanding, and being retained. We're already establishing a faith-based initiative with many of our churches and houses of worship, because we understand the role that they play in having the credibility in the neighborhood, and they have their pulse on issues and opportunities that not only Promise Zone supports, but the work of the Opportunity Zone really complements as well. We're committed to STEM education with our youth and committed to housing young people who are either unemployed, homeless, at risk of becoming homeless, aging out of foster care, and looking at Jobs Plus, which is another federal program that we administer here in Sacramento that's very close to Envision Centers. I know that that's an effort that this administration is really supporting, but Jobs Plus came about first, and we are leading that effort in providing job training, placement for public housing residents. If on the next slide, you'll see that we have a number of the first in the nation. One of them is called our Financial Institution Partnership Opportunity, where we've brought together lenders from both banks and credit unions to come together to pool their funds and to focus their efforts to get the maximum impact. And they're coming together. This is a bank-led, bank-driven opportunity zone and promise zone focused effort. And to date, we have over $200,000, which has gone into supporting organizations that are businesses that are creating opportunities for individuals here in Sacramento. We're committed to sustainable communities, and that means zero emissions and electric vehicles. Sacramento has the first public housing agency in the country where electric vehicles are available to public housing residents to check out as in car share to be able to enhance their ability and mobility. I know that the Strategic Growth Council will be commenting in a bit, but in Sacramento, we've been the recipient of two very significant investments through Strategic Growth Council. One is our Sacramento Integrated Multimodal Place-Based Living, which is supports the largest urban mixed income, mixed use development in Sacramento. That's at the core of it is our rail yards project, which will basically double the size of downtown, and it's in an opportunity zone. And so is the Integrated Modal Place-Based Living project, which is bringing transit as well as many other modes of opportunity to move throughout the city. We're supporting jump bikes, and the jump bikes are throughout not only Sacramento, but targeted in the Promise Zone as well. We have a number of other initiatives that support health. We've got our Black Child Legacy campaign, which looks at extending the life and providing health outcomes. All of these things, and you'll see on the next slide, really support a healthy and strong community. But as it relates to the opportunity zone investment within the Promise Zone, we've had a major announcement here in Sacramento over the last week or so, and that's the MLS soccer stadium. It's been in the works for a number of years, but it is coming to reality, and it's in the heart of the Opportunity Zone. And in the Opportunity Zone, we also have Marisol Village, which again is our largest urban, green, mixed income, mixed use neighborhood that's under construction now. It's in the Opportunity Zone. We have a number of other projects that are already underway in the Opportunity Zone. But what we found in Sacramento that has made all the difference is understanding how to build successful cross-sector collaborations. For without successful collaborations, things cannot be sustained. So for us, we see that there is a process. The first is it's orienting our partners that of the opportunity and the process for building trust. The Promise Zone was a total game changer in Sacramento. We don't do business in silos the way we've done them before. Because we've been building, we focused on building trust, clarifying goals among our partners. And currently we have over 160 Promise Zone partners, all supporting the work of the Promise Zone and supporting goals and opportunities in the Opportunity Zone. After goal clarification, being committed, this is not work that's done in 12 months. The work of changing lives and changing communities is measured in decades. And sometimes people aren't clear about that. And so we do every day what we can as quickly as we can, but institutional and fundamental societal change and transformation is a long-term initiative, and you've got to be committed to the long term. The other is how to implement it, how to clarify goals and processes so that you can implement things that are sustainable, that have high performance and have high impact. And then you start all over again and you continue orienting the new partners and building trust with them. And so this is the great work, because it's teamwork that makes the dream work in Sacramento. We're happy to just let you know that next week we'll be hosting Senator Scott Turner, who is the Executive Director of the White House Council on Opportunity and Revitalization. And so he's going to be here in Sacramento. He's going to be meeting with a small team of community leaders, and they've all been informed and welcomed. Toward the end of the day, we're having a session focusing on investment. We've had a lot of discussion about opportunity zones, but without the investors and without investment, there isn't change. So I'm extending, the seating is very limited. But if you're listening to this and you are leading a qualified opportunity fund and you would like to participate in our afternoon session, because we're looking for investors and fund managers, we welcome the opportunity. You can contact us at Julius Austin and visit our website. And I'm happy to link in on anybody on LinkedIn. And thank you for the opportunity of sharing what's going on in Sacramento.
Thank you very much. Okay, so then we have the next up is the San Diego Promise Zone, and we have Catherine Crow.
Hi, everyone. Thank you again so much for this opportunity to share what's happening in the San Diego Promise Zone. I will say that it is hard to follow Tyrone because he's amazingly excited about the work he's doing, as I think we all are, but you can obviously tell that it really comes through in his presentation. Next slide, please. So our Promise Zone is about 6.5 square miles. It's got a population of about 89,000 people with a 27% poverty rate, a 12% unemployment rate, and a 40% youth unemployment rate. Again, as has been said before, this area was chosen because it's a high need area, but it also has a lot of rich assets, including cultural assets and a network of strong and long-term nonprofit organizations providing a variety of services that really help people in any kind of situation that they're in. And one of the things, obviously, that the Promise Zone does is bring those folks together and really try and get them to break out of their silos, which can be quite challenging, but is definitely working, as we have seen over the 3 years. Next slide, please. So these are our 6 working group goal areas. I'm going to tell you a little bit about what each one has been working on, and it will be working on in the upcoming calendar year. I will say that we, again, were a 3rd round designation. So we were awarded the designation in June of 2016 and really didn't convene the group again until about December, just in order to, we had to create a position, which is my position. I was here in a different department at the city, and so a position had to be created in the economic development department. So there were lots of internal things that we had to set in motion before we could actually launch. So we have had some busy couple of years, definitely. We have we worked with a local consultant, Harder & Company, on a 10-year strategic plan, and all of the working groups met on a monthly basis and created logic models and work plans that are updated at minimum annually. So we have a very good foundation, and one thing that we had heard from previous in the rounds 1 and 2 is that it was really important to spend the time doing the planning, because if you didn't do it in the beginning, you'd end up coming back and doing it. And so we kind of, it's based on collective impact. So again, we asked our partners, we said there are different ways we can do this. We kind of, think that we should go this way, so we are not doing any backtracking. And fortunately, our partners agreed with that. And so that is what we did, and spent about, I would say, 13 months working on that strategic planning process. And the work plans. So creating jobs and improving educational opportunities have actually been working together and meeting together for about the last year. And we are working on that job and career pipeline, because what we have heard from our local really large partners like NASCO and BAE is that they can fill the jobs, but they're turning away so many young people or people of any age that don't have even the basic skills to come to really be eligible to apply there. So we created a career pathways pipeline. We had an event in May of this year and brought together job training programs and businesses working on advanced manufacturing, communications and information technology, and the construction trades. And then through our partners, recruited seniors in high school and some opportunity youth, but mostly seniors in high school that were potentially going to turn into opportunity youth. We worked with counselors in the schools in and around the Promise Zone to help us identify those youth that really just had not a clue what they were going to do once they graduated. So this was our first event in this kind of event, and we brought together about 72 youth and 28 job training providers, and then business representatives from those 3 fields. And the business representatives actually spoke to the youth, and the youth were able to ask questions and really hear how hear of all of the different possibilities and varieties of kinds and types of jobs that are available in each of these big industries, and also the big local employers. So it was really successful, and that definitely made us want to start planning the next one. So that's what those 2 groups are working on right now. And increasing economic activities, we were able to increase the Economic Development Department's reimbursement for our storefront improvement project, or program rather. So if a small business is a street-facing entity and wants to apply for the storefront improvement program, instead of getting a 50% reimbursement rate, they actually get a 65% reimbursement rate just for being in the Promise Zone. So that was something that, because it was an existing program, we did have to go back to council and get that approved, but it was unanimously supported. So that was excellent. We're also doing business walks in the Promise Zone to talk about the programs that we provide here at the city that can help small businesses strengthen and expand, as well as those programs of our partners. Because again, if we're trying to help break down the silos, we don't want to go in and just talk about, I don't want to go in and just talk about city programs. I want to go in and talk about the 10 programs that our partners are providing along with the programs of the city. For creating a priority of safety, that group decided to try and help engage residents who may not be engaged in their community, because in the Promise Zone, there's about 70% of the residents are renters. And so the Get It Done application was created by the city. And it's really to help people become more involved in what's happening in their community. And it's basically a GIS application that you can report something that's been you know, something that a dump site, or if there is a mattress in your you know, on the street or something, and that way it goes directly to, it's a really simple app to use, and that report goes directly to the appropriate city department. If they're reporting something that the city actually doesn't take care of, which happens a lot, but that's okay because we still want to hear what those reports are, then there is a department in the city that will make sure that those reports get sent to the appropriate entity. Usually it's Caltrans if there's something, you know, on the highway, or SDG&E if it has to do with power lines. Increasing access to affordable housing. We have convened around the accessory dwelling unit guide that the city and some partners recently produced. We have heard from Sandag about the regional or the number of housing units that need to be built regionally. So we're bringing people together in one place, and they're able to get more information than they would if they were going to get it. They would have to get it kind of like one by one. So we really think of ourselves as connecting and convening and disseminating information. And then increasing access to healthcare and healthy foods. We were able to create a partnership with the Jackie Robinson YMCA, which is in our San Diego Promise Zone, to develop a garden on a vacant piece of land that they have on their property. And we have identified a person, a resident, who wants to spearhead getting a garden in every one of the elementary schools in the Promise Zone, and there are actually quite a few. So that's what we have been working on. And next slide, please. So I will say that there have been a lot of accomplishments. I was really trying to keep my presentation at 5 minutes. So there's more than these, but these are, I think, some of the most exciting. Because it takes an act of Congress, quote unquote, to get City Council to approve something and get it through the process, really. We're really excited to be able to say that the Council approved the expedited permitting in the Promise Zone. So this has actually meant a lot for our partners who are trying to develop property and expand their programs like Workshops for Warriors. And it's just also meant a lot to, again, small business owners who just can't wait, you know, the time that it takes. It basically cuts the expediting or the permitting process, in about half. We were awarded one of 18 Envision Center designations from HUD, and the San Diego Housing Commission is the implementing partner in the Envision Center. They are also an implementing partner of the Promise Zone. And we're the only urban Promise Zone, actually, that all of the census tracts are also designated as Opportunity Zone census tracts. So we have 35 in the city, but all 19 that are in the Promise Zone are also Opportunity Zones. And we think that this is really going to be a game changer in many ways, but just speaking from the nonprofit partner side of things, there were a lot of bonus points and priority consideration opportunities in a ton of federal funding opportunities when the Promise Zone was first introduced by the previous administration. That was one of the things that I found was bringing people that was the carrot to bring people to the table. And as we saw the change in administration and just, you know, not the priority around this because for whatever reason, those bonus points for Promise Zone projects have kind of fallen off. With the Opportunity Zone and the fact that we are, you know, layered right on top of that, I think is going to be a big incentive to bring more people to the table who may have not be participating as much as they used to. Next slide. But that said, our partners collectively pursued 34 grants in the last 3 years, actually starting, I think, in October of 16, and 14 have been awarded resulting in just over $46 million, which for entities that are really not used to working with each other, I think is pretty amazing. That's been the biggest thing that I found as satisfying working in nonprofits. Until 6 years ago when I got the job at the city, I worked in nonprofits since 1999 when I came to San Diego, and I've really never seen such serious focus on collaboration as we have since we got the Promise Zone designation. It has been a game changer, as other people have said, and it really is showing people that there's momentum in this area. And so when somebody wants to, create a program, and there's 186 low moderate income census tracts in San Diego, they look at what's being done in the Promise Zone and they say, wow, there's so much momentum, let's go there and let's see what we can do there so we can build upon what's already been built. We have gotten private funding in which the city has been a partner, totaling about $3.8 million. And we also received in-kind assistance for a community perception survey from San Diego State University criminal justice students that was valued at $52,000. And I think that's it. I could go on and on, but I think I'm probably already over time. But I'm happy to answer any questions and provide any additional information that anybody would like. And thank you again for inviting me to participate.
Great, thank you so much, Catherine. So next we're gonna go ahead and move on to the LA Promise Zone, and then we're just cognizant that we are at 11:12, so just for timing for those who are participating in the webinar. So for next up, we're gonna have Eric return again to talk about the Los Angeles Promise Zone. So Eric, I'm gonna go ahead and unmute you.
Great, thank you very much. On behalf of Elder Sanabria, who's with the City of Los Angeles Mayor's Office of Economic Opportunity, I'm just going to give a very brief overview of the LA Promise Zone efforts and the alignment to the Opportunity Zones. On the next slide, you'll see this is the location of the LA Promise Zone. So it's located in Hollywood, East Hollywood, Pico Union, Westlake, Mid-Wilshire, Koreatown, Thai Town, Little Armenia, very culturally diverse, culturally rich community. So if you go to the next slide, you'll see some of the key demographics at the time of the application for the LA Promise Zone, which was a first round application. Some of the key things you'll see are to the right, 60% of the families are rent burdened and 60% of the population in the LA Promise Zone were born outside of the United States. In addition to 33% of households earned less than $20,000 per year. So unlike much of what people think of these neighborhoods, there are definitely needs in this community. On the next slide, you'll see the areas in the focus of the LA Promise Zone, which was the goals on economic opportunity, educational opportunities, making the neighborhood safe, and building equitable, livable, and sustainable communities focused around a collective impact model. On the next slide, you'll see how the LA Promise Zone functions. So the City of Los Angeles is the lead agency and applicant for the LA Promise Zone. And we have a leadership council with 4 working groups that are aligned to the 4 goals of the LA Promise Zone. On the next slide, you'll see some of the key accomplishments. So to date, the LA Promise Zone has been awarded 67 federal grants for over $310 million. And those include awards from 14 different federal agencies, and their awards have gone to 25 different LA Promise Zone partners, and 82% of the $310 million has gone to a variety of different partners for the LA Promise Zone. As I mentioned, there's 4 working groups, but we also have 3 key task forces. One is early childhood education. One is a home zone focused on overcrowded and substandard housing conditions and innovations in housing, a data and evaluation task force, as well as a myriad of action planning teams. So the working groups create action plans focused on the Promise Zone goals, and here are some examples: a community foods project, digital connections for seniors, as I mentioned, addressing overcrowded and substandard housing conditions, and community-based crime reduction in a high crime park. We started out with 49 partners, and we now have over 75, along with 80 additional supporting organizations. We also have developed a comprehensive data and evaluation framework, and have significantly improved educational outcomes and high school graduation rates, college readiness, and college acceptance rates. On the next slide, you'll see how the LA Promise Zone opportunity zones align. So 64 of 65 of the census tracts in the LA Promise Zone were eligible for opportunity zones, and the Treasury approved the governor's submission of having 42 of the 64 approved as opportunity zones, and there are 5 additional census tracts that are actually adjacent to those in the LA Promise Zone, bringing a total of 47, which would be, the 42 alone would be more than 17 states in the United States. On the next slide, you will see some contact information for the LA Promise Zone, and then my contact information on the next slide. So keep it short to move on to the next group. Thanks.
Great, thank you, Eric. So next we have with the Strategic Growth Council. So the next set of programs, so just to give a little bit of an overlay, we just had the 4 promise zones each speak and then also share about their opportunity zones of the program. The next 4 presenters will all be from state programs and state agencies throughout California state government, who have also programs that are much in alignment with a lot of the merits of both the Opportunity Zone and the Promise Zone program relating to community development, economic development, supporting low-income families, supporting affordable housing, many of these programs. So we have next the Strategic Growth Council with Alexandra Gallo.
Hi everyone, this is Alexandra Gallo with the Transformative Climate Communities Program at the Strategic Growth Council. Thank you to those who have given us a shout out so far in the presentation. That's great, and I will go ahead and give a brief overview of our program. So Transformative Climate Communities, TCC, is a program housed at the Strategic Growth Council in coordination with the Department of Conservation. They help administer our program. Our program is a California climate investment program, meaning that our program uses funds from cap and trade, and ultimately our projects need to reduce greenhouse gas emissions throughout the state. And so TCC was established in 2016 through Assembly Bill 2722 to fund the development and implementation of neighborhood level transformative climate community plans. In the authoring legislation, the bill said that this program needed to provide economic, environmental, and health benefits to the state's most disadvantaged communities. So our program aims to do that by funding projects in disadvantaged communities that have multiple coordinated greenhouse gas reduction projects. Ultimately, our program is very focused on the community-driven aspect, meaning that all applicants need to develop a collaborative stakeholder process for the decision-making of those projects, and then also throughout implementation and continuing to do community engagement, even before submitting the application and throughout the entire process. Next slide. Great, thank you. And so the TCC program has 2 types of grants that applicants can apply for. There are implementation grants and then planning grants, which I will go into detail in the next slide. So as mentioned, we are a fairly new grant program. So in round 1, we had $133 million that we've awarded to Fresno, Ontario, and the Watts community in Los Angeles. Fresno has our biggest award at $66.5 million. Ontario has $33.25 million, and Watts has $33.25 million. This is competitive grant funding, and we have limited funding, and the grant term is for 5 years. Also, our funding is mandated by the legislature each year, so we do go through the legislative process. In round 2, we had less funding. We had $46 million. We gave $23 million to the city of Pacoima, which is in Los Angeles, and then also $23 million to Sacramento. And then we are currently entering our round 3 phase of the program. We've just released all of our materials, including our guidelines, and communities can begin to access our applications. But for this round, we have $56.4 million from the legislature, in which we're awarding 2 awards for $28.2 million each. Next slide, please. As mentioned, we also have planning grant awards. These awards are smaller amounts, and these awards are really meant to prepare communities to apply for our implementation grants, as well as other sorts of California climate investment dollars. So funding can go towards community engagement to help establish various projects that communities would apply for through our program. They can also fund feasibility studies for different projects, and they can also fund environmental impact reports. It really depends on the community's needs and what specifically they need to do planning for in order to become ready for various funds. So in round 1, we funded 10 locations at roughly $170,000 each. And then in round 2, we funded 5 locations at $200,000 each. And then in round 3, we have 3 awards that we can give out for $200,000 each. And as you can see on the map, the locations vary throughout the state. Something that I forgot to mention on the implementation grant slide is that the applicant eligibility is top 10% disadvantaged communities per Cal Enviro screen for round 3. So in rounds 1 and 2, it was at top 5%. Running into round 3, it's going to be at top 10%. So keep that in mind. For our planning grant awards, however, it is slightly different. Applicants can be within the top 25% of disadvantaged communities, and unincorporated communities can apply and for our planning grant awards, which varies from our implementation grants. Currently with our implementation grants, unincorporated communities cannot apply for them unless for round 3, they've received planning grant awards in the past. And we have a list of, I think, 4 communities in our guidelines, if you're wondering if you're one of those communities. Next slide, please. And so this image is an example of what a TCC award may look like in a given community. And actually, a lot of our awards so far do look like this. And so applicants will be able to choose at least 3 project types from our running list of project types. And so that may include an affordable housing project, solar improvements, any sort of transit infrastructure improvements. So in many cases, we've replaced buses with electric buses. In Sacramento, we're funding a light rail station, lots of urban greening. The Watts community in LA, who we've awarded in round 1, is adding a lot of urban greening components to their entire project area. And there also needs to be integrated approaches to all of these projects. So in some way, they should be able to connect to each other, and not only project to project, but also to ongoing investment that has happened in and around the community. And so the project area must also be 5 square miles, which means there will be deep investment in the community throughout this grant award, and also the 5 square mile radius needs to be contiguous. And then in addition to the projects themselves, all of the applicants are required to develop transformative plans that address various components of what would truly make a community transformative. So that includes community engagement, workforce development, and anti-displacement strategies. In addition, the applicants also need to have leverage funding up to 50% of the grant award, of outside investment coming into the communities to help those projects even more. In addition to that, all of the projects need to have climate strategies embedded within them and in the overall project area. So really looking at how these potential projects and investments would be impacted by potential climate interruptions in the future and how the community will plan to overcome that, particularly through these projects and other sort of planning and outreach strategies. And then we can go ahead and move to the next slide. And so this is just highlighting one of our projects that we've awarded. So in round one, as I mentioned, Fresno received our largest award. So looking at the photo I showed you in the last one with all the different project examples, this is kind of lined up in a linear way. So gives you an idea of what Fresno, what their projects are looking at. So there's an affordable housing development that also has a lot of solar components. There's active transportation that will connect residents to nearby opportunities and investments. There's low carbon transportation, so there will be an electric vehicle sharing program, lots of urban greening at various places within the project area. And then there's also a food waste prevention and rescue program. It's essentially a community garden. And then all of these projects also have transformative elements embedded within them, as I mentioned. So these are a required part of the application and includes community engagement, workforce development, anti-displacement, etc. So that just gives you an idea of what one investment would look like, and in this example, it's Fresno. And what I will say just really quickly as it relates to opportunity zones is that our team over at TCC, we're beginning to do some preliminary research on our past investments and how that already is or has began to overlay with opportunity zone investments. So for our round one awardee, Ontario, I know that they've actually lined up their affordable housing project and the financing structure for it to help line up with an opportunity zone investment. So I just know that that's one example of something that's been happening specifically in Ontario, but there's also, we're looking at other examples in our project areas. And then next slide, please. And that is just my contact information if you have any questions about our application process and our program. And thanks for having me.
Thank you. And then next we have the California Department of Housing and Community Development, or HCD. So then I'll go ahead and introduce Jessica Hayes with HCD.
Good morning. My name is Jessica Hayes. I'm the Federal Program Specialist with the California Department of Housing and Community Development. HCD manages a whole bunch of different programs, especially focused on housing, homelessness response, different programs for different types of communities. I'm going to focus on one of our most versatile programs, which is the Community Development Block Grant Program. You want to jump to the next slide? Thank you. So the CDBG program is a federally funded program managed through HUD that is managed at the state level for non-entitlement communities. So non-entitlement communities are typically smaller communities, often rural, cities less than 50,000, counties less than 200,000 in population. The state gets about $30 million annually for this Community Development Block Grant Program. And it's been working on a redesign program to help make this program better functioning and easier to use for different state grantees. The next slide. So you can use CDBG to fund a lot of different things. Top of the list here is economic development, and that's really where there's a good nexus with the opportunity zone conversation. We can do business assistance, loans, infrastructure grants. They can do microenterprise for very small businesses. But there's a range of different opportunities to help build economic vitality, especially in areas that have higher density, low income populations. You can also do housing assistance. So the Community Development Block Grant Program can fund homebuyer, housing rehab, other housing programs, housing counseling to help provide for stable housing in communities. It provides support for public services, so nutrition support, senior assistance, youth programs, a lot of after-school programs, and then also public facilities, so community facilities, public safety facilities, fire stations, senior centers, youth centers, that sort of facility. The program can support public infrastructure, so water, sewer, broadband. Oftentimes we do these as a grant, and it's one of the only programs that does provide infrastructure support as a grant. And then there's opportunities to support planning. And sometimes this is very specific planning for like a specific project, but often it's also planning for larger studies to understand whether or not an area has specific economic development needs, or whether or not there are housing issues that need to have specific programs targeting those problems. Next slide. In order to participate in the CDBG program, there's a few kind of basic requirements that an activity or a project or a program is going to have to address. The top one is that whatever your project, whatever your proposal is, it will have to meet a national objective. There's 3 national objectives, but there's really only one that really fits very generally in most jurisdictions where we work. The 3 are benefit to low and moderate income persons. You can address slums and blight or urgent need. Urgent need is really related mostly to disaster, so that doesn't come up unless there is a specific disaster tie. Slums and blight requires an action by a jurisdiction to declare an area slummed and blighted. So really the national objective that gets the most use is the benefit to low and moderate income persons. And that would be, individuals, households, and neighborhoods. And that's where the overlap with the opportunity zones is really a good fit. There's also some federal cross-cutting requirements that apply to the Community Development Block Grant Program that's really important to keep in mind when jurisdictions are considering planning their projects or working with their nonprofits or therefore businesses to figure out how they're going to apply. And that means that these are issues that need to be addressed and kind of budgeted into the overall cost of the program. So there is the Davis-Bacon labor compliance. That's a federal layer of labor standards. It's applied over on top of the state prevailing wage. There is a National Environmental Protection Act requirements. So there's NEPA clearances that need to be addressed. And those are on top of the California Environmental Protection Act requirements. So there's different levels of environmental review that need to be addressed. And then there's federal procurement standards, and the federal procurement standards typically have a fairly good fit with state and local procurement requirements, but there's always some little nuances for the federal programs that need to be addressed. And then anytime that an agency is receiving a federal grant, whether it is one that's operated as a pass-through from the state, or if they're a direct entitlement receiving funding directly from HUD, there are the federally required program reporting and tracking, and that's demographic data, program project performance data, beneficiary data. So there's a fair amount of reporting and tracking that needs to happen to help make sure that the funding is helping the people that it was intended to help, and it is funding the project the way it was intended. Next slide. So there are a couple of different pots of money, different set-asides and different limits that have to be kind of taken into consideration when you're operating or considering applying for a community development block grant. The federal limits, there's a 15% cap on public services. So that means no more than 50% of that annual allocation can be used for that. There's a 20% cap on planning and general program administration. But then there are also the state set-asides, and economic development has been a priority for the state of California for quite a while. The state of California, the state legislature has designated 30% of the annual allocation for the CDBG program to be set aside for economic development activities. Over the last several years, that money has been undersubscribed, and so we're really looking to do some redesign and some restructuring of the CDBG program to help encourage smaller jurisdictions, rural jurisdictions, and jurisdictions with opportunity zones to come apply for this funding and come up with some good projects to help kind of drive some more economic development in their communities. The other set aside is a 51% set aside for housing related activities. And that's really defined as anything that supports existing housing, so housing preservation, home buyer assistance, housing rehabilitation, multifamily housing rehabilitation, as well as infrastructure and facilities that support housing. So that would be offsite infrastructure for new housing development, or even facility infrastructure that supports housing, such as like a fire station or something else that allows for additional housing to be developed in an area. And then there's a 5% set aside for the colonias, which is really the jurisdictions down in Imperial County that are pretty close to the border. There's a bunch of deadline requirements that need to be met in terms of operating under CDBG. And one of the key factors is that the funds must be obligated within the federal deadlines, which is a 15-month deadline that we have to be very, very cognizant of, or otherwise the funds are at risk. So there's a push to get money out the door, to get it obligated and get it into projects. If a jurisdiction, in partnership with their either their neighbors or with a nonprofit, if they feel they have a good project, they should definitely reach out to us and talk about it, because there might be some opportunities to help get them into the next round of funding. Next slide. So we're going to be running a 2-year annual NOFA starting in January. It will be our first year of this. We'll do 2 years in January, and then it'll be 1 year every January after that. So we're expecting to roll out approximately 60 million in January. We are piloting a brand new online grant management system. So this will allow for us to do online application intake, online application review, and then online project management. And we are rolling out our CDBG program redesign, which has really been a stakeholder-driven 2-year process where we've restructured the program kind of from scratch. We've got brand new brand new guidelines out. They're up on our website. We are going to be accepting over-the-counter applications, so there'll be an actual over-the-counter open window for folks to apply for funding. We've got some new policies that we'll be rolling out to kind of help provide better direction and how to use the different types of funding. And then we've been doing a lot of training modules on the NEPA, on environmental requirements, on procurement, on just general program operating, to help folks feel like they have an understanding and feel like they can come out and actually make a successful CDBG application and a successful CDBG project. Next. And that's all I have. Kind of ran through that fast. Hope to catch up a little time for you.
Great. Thank you so much, Jessica. All right. And then next, we do have Larry Flood from the State Treasurer's Office. And give me a moment.
Are my slides? Okay. Again, my name is Larry Flood, and I'm the Executive Director of the California Debt Limit Allocation Committee, which is one of 15 active boards, commissions, and authorities, or BCAs, within the Office of the State Treasurer. We're also one of 2 BCAs actively involved in affordable housing. I'm here today to represent the Office of the State Treasurer and to discuss our involvement in building affordable communities and opportunity zones. Next slide. As I mentioned, there are 2 BCAs within the Treasurer's Office that are actively involved in affordable housing. The first is the California Tax Credit Allocation Committee, or TCAC, which is the entity responsible for allocating the federal low-income housing tax credits and the state low-income housing tax credit. Both programs were created to promote private investment in affordable rental housing. The second BCA is the California Debt Limit Allocation Committee, which is my organization, or CDLAC. And CDLAC is the entity responsible for allocating the annual state ceiling of tax-exempt bonds used to finance exempt facilities owned by private entities. It's also known as private activity bonds. The IRS code has a long list of exempt facilities, but in the state of California, affordable housing is by far the greatest use. Next slide, please. It is the mission of Governor Newsom and Treasurer Ma to build a California that is truly for all Californians. In fact, Governor Ma has given us 6 goals to use as guiding principles in terms of guiding our drafting of policies and programs. And those rules are to increase housing production, to increase development efficiency, to spur new technology, to increase opportunity for women and people of color, to empower individuals in distressed communities, and to build wealth for all Californians. We believe that building wealth or that building affordable communities in opportunity zones meets a number of the core principles espoused by Treasurer Ma. Next slide, please. In particular, we believe that mixed income development represents a possible solution for opportunity fund investors. Low-income housing tax credit properties are not generally attractive investments to opportunity fund investors. The principal reasons for this are that the properties generally have no cash flow due to the restricted rents and no real estate upside or appreciation due primarily to location. We believe that adding a workforce housing component or a market rate component or both would improve investment returns, make opportunity fund investments more attractive, and build a more diverse community. Similarly, we believe that mixed-use development would also boost investor returns and provide much-needed capital for the types of commercial infrastructure necessary to make affordable communities viable. Next slide, please. In terms of our outreach, CIDLAC and TCAC have financed many low-income housing tax credit projects in opportunity zones, albeit without the opportunity fund investment. We believe, however, that mixed income development spurred by recent legislation like SB 2 and the AB 101 new state tax credit monies will jumpstart investment in opportunity zones and contribute to opportunity funds investing in affordable communities. And in the interest of time, I think that I will conclude my remarks there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Larry. And then next up, we have a program for featuring businesses here housed within the Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development. So with that, I'm going to give Marie Davis with the California Competes Tax Credit Program.
Hi, everyone. My name is Marie Davis. I'm going to be talking to you about the California Competes Tax Credit Program today. What is the program? Okay, there we go. What is the program? It is a tax credit that businesses can use against the income tax due to the Franchise Tax Board. It is a non-refundable, non-transferable tax credit, but it does have a 6-year carryover so that businesses can continue to use it in future years. There is some accountability measures tied to the program, and there are recapture provisions. So why are we talking about this today? The California Competes Tax Credit Program is a competitive application, and businesses that apply for the credit are asked to kind of describe why they need the credit and how the credit will play a role in their decision to expand and grow in California. The types of questions that are asked, you can see on the screen here, and I wanted to call to your attention a few of these points. One is that when evaluating the applications, the California Competes analysts are specifically looking to see what other incentives are available to these businesses. So in your application, if you or a business that you know of are applying to this program, it would behoove you to call out and say, we are near an opportunity zone. We are in an opportunity zone. We work with the promise zone. We're in the promise zone. Any of those other incentives that are available, because it strengthens the application and it shows that it's a strategic investment for the state of California. One of the really great things about this program is that businesses tell the state how much credit they need. One of the big threshold questions of applicants to the program is, how will the credit be critical to your ability to create jobs that might otherwise not be created? And part of that question is, how much amount of credit, what is the amount of credit that will be that but-for case for the business? So businesses can apply for the smallest credit request for the program is $20,000, and it goes as high as 20% of the total year's allocation. And so for that year, it's about $45 million. So if you have more questions about that, you can go to the frequently asked questions on the GO-Biz website. And as mentioned previously, this is the tax credit availability for this year. 180 million guaranteed for this year and the next few years. And as I said, there's a little bit of rollover, as I mentioned before, there's a little bit of rollover from previous years. So this year, the total credit available is at about 230 million. So I did also want to mention that the next open funding round begins in January. The total amount of credit available at that time is 75 million. I would absolutely recommend giving the California Competes tax credit team a call now if you have questions, or if you think that you or someone you know will be applying, so that you can start gathering your materials and put in your application during that time. And I think that's everything I have. Thank you for your time.
Awesome. Well, thank you everyone for joining the webinar today. We are having this period to go over a few of the questions that we received internally through the webinar, and we hope that some of them will be able to answer your questions that you may have as well. As an addition, we do have staff here online, so if you do want to submit questions now through the Zoom portal, you can do so, and then we can then answer them over the line here today. In addition, if you have questions specifically for the programs, we will then redirect you to proper contacts. And then you can also ask questions through the Opportunity Zones website, Ask the Wizard page. So I'm gonna pass it over to Kaina. So we're gonna go over just maybe some of the questions and clarifications for the programs as well, and all the questions that were answered.
Well, thank you very much, Trey. This was, I hope, for most of you guys, an informative session. I know we covered a lot of stuff, and I'm sure that there's gonna be more questions coming in at some point. But some of the ones that I grouped some of them together so that way we can cover them all at once. There was a question related to disaster areas and their inclusion in opportunity zones. So currently there was a federal law passed, which included most of Puerto Rico into the Opportunity Zones program. And as it was passed federally, that is the only manner in which a new Opportunity Zone can be designated. There have been, and I think that in Eric's slides at the beginning, he touched on some of the other bills that are pending or that have been proposed by legislators on the federal level, some of which do have that disaster quotient included. But at this time, there are no additional zones available other than those designated by the Puerto Rico disaster. That's not to say that it won't happen in the future. And if there are designations similar to what happened in Puerto Rico, we'll be sure to push that information to everybody, not just included in this call, but on our website, which is opzones.ca.gov. Another question that came up was more specifically about what are the programs related to rural areas, more specifically. And some of the resources that you can find are also going to be available through the Housing and Urban Development website, which is opportunityzones.gov. And it actually outlines all the 171 programs that Eric introduced earlier. We'll be happy to submit that information over to Eric Yost, and he'll be able to make that connection with you guys as well. Oh, we just got another question. How does a jurisdiction become part of the promise zones? So unfortunately, I believe that the designations for promise zones are locked based on the previous submissions. If that is incorrect, and I'm actually going to be sending this to our promise zone representatives as well, to make sure that the answer is given to you in the most timely and most effective and efficient manner possible. That being said, I do believe that there are limitations to the number of additional promise zones that could be up. If Eric is available, I'm willing to unmute the phone right now for him and see if he has an answer to that question. Eric?
Sure. Yes. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, great. Yeah, so the 22 existing promise zones are established, and there's no additional, at this time, plan for additional promise zones to be designated. And the other thing I just wanted to share back on there is a HUD Distressed Cities Technical Assistance application that's available for those communities that have met a minimum of 3 poverty type requirements, in addition to being a designated disaster area. So please check out HUD's technical assistance for that, because you can see if you're eligible, which will help a lot of the more newly and recently created disaster areas to get technical assistance from HUD if your community has less than a certain population level. Thanks.
Thanks, Eric. So basically what we're looking at here is we had a couple questions that were very specific about Los Angeles, and I'm going to direct those to the individuals who run the LA Promise Zones. But for now, it looks like most of the questions have been covered, with the exception of those very specified, more programmatic questions. So with that, and we're actually on perfect timing right now, I would just like to thank all of our presenters, Eric, Angela, Effie, Tyrone, Catherine, Alexandra, Jessica, Larry, Marie, and Traylon for running a really good show. Oh, we have one more question in. I'm going to see what is that. So this is a question related to the extension of the boundary. Okay. Opportunity zones are derived based on census tracts, and those census tracts are basically rejiggered every time the census is completed. So there will be no alterations to the existing census tracts or to boundaries differentials. When the next census comes out, if it becomes part of, say, a new program related to opportunity zones, there may be distinctions and changes in that segment. However, at the current time, the lines are the lines, and they cannot be changed without federal, basically, legislation. So unfortunately, the extension of the boundary line is not possible at this time, but that is definitely something that you may want to bring up to your legislators. So just so everybody knows, we will be providing this entire presentation as well as contact information for many of our presenters on our website at the conclusion of this presentation, and it looks like we are ready to close. So again, I'd like to thank all of our participants. We will be posting this hopefully within the next 48 hours. This is our first time running it on this platform, so hopefully we can get it done right the first time, and I appreciate all your guys' patience. Thank you, Trey, for running an excellent show, and have a great day.
Thank you, everybody.
Okay. Yeah.